You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm talking with Dinah Alam, Head of UX and CRO at Rocketmill. Dinah has over 16 years' experience in e-commerce and customer experience, of which 10 years client-side with brands such as TUI, Thomas Cook, Virgin Holidays and more. Having made the change to agency side 6 years ago, dealing with retail and finance brands, she is now well placed to identify the challenges that are now facing many organisations. Amongst other topics, we'll discuss if with today's economic pressure on consumers, does price always trump customer experience, or is it time to double down on better customer relationships? So Dinah, you left university with a degree in visual communications, and during the last 16 years or so, you've spent 7 years in web-centric roles within the travel industry. Could you tell me a little bit about your journey to where you are as the head of UX and CRO?
Yeah, I actually think it was 12 and a half years in the travel industry, but
Wow.
Altogether, just
Yeah.
different companies, different brands you probably would have heard of. But back then, I actually I did a design degree, as you just stated. Actually got into that kind of a commercial role, and sort of found out that I wasn't just inspired by creative thinking and creative stuff. I actually got quite into the commerciality of working in business, and ended up working as an e-commerce manager on various websites, and then as sort of more and more specialisms and sort of more sort of user-centered thinking came into the process of what we were doing when we were managing our websites. I ended up managing UX teams as well as managing digital products, and then ultimately, as the discipline sort of grew, I ended up managing CRO as well. And over time, I ended up working in an agency as head of conversion services, where I managed conversion optimization services and user research. And in my current role, I'm head of UX and CRO at an agency called Rocketmill. And I just want to sort of end that sort of brief career history with I really enjoy working with both of these disciplines. I worked for many years, obviously, in sort of related subjects, but UX and CRO, I really enjoyed how they overlap and how they complement each other's existence as such.
It's quite strange because most people would associate left-brained people with more analytical and right-brained people with more associated with imagination, orientation, intuition. And yet you're saying that you like both of those. So which one do you think you are primary and which one is secondary, or is it both the same?
I think, maybe you push more one in your work life because of reality. I mean, if I could sit at home doodling pictures all day, maybe I'd be that right brain person. But I really enjoy making things happen and making things work, and making user experiences that work for both users and business. And I don't really know where that actually sort of puts me, but I guess I'm probably fairly analytical, with a sprinkle of right-brained activity in my day-to-day. So I'm not sure if you can be a bit of both.
I'm sure you can. It just seems strange that one is very analytical and the other is very intuitive, design-led, kind of softer skills, and the other is very, very hard skills. I'm just trying to think, it must be, when you're looking at things from a design perspective, are you always thinking analytics behind it?
I guess there's two parts to that. I mean, one, with UX design is an outcome of good UX is user satisfaction. So if you just design and you don't have a feedback loop, how can you understand if your UX design was successful? So talking to users and user testing a digital product is one way of closing that feedback loop, but learning from data and experimentation and the insights you get from that to ensure you can keep refining and improving that user experience is hugely important to achieving that user satisfaction goal. So that's kind of one way that those things kind of come together. And then from an experimenter's perspective, you can just, start with testing small aspects of a user experience, and you don't necessarily have to be too radical about your design thinking, and you might get a series of good results, but eventually you'll likely mop up all the low-hanging fruit that's to be had, and reach a bit of a peak. You might see your results start to wane, and you're kind of going, well, what are we doing here? And you're probably, you're reaching a peak which is known as the local maxima in the industry, and you need to start thinking about more innovative ideas in answer to your problems. And that can mean being bolder and making deeper changes to your UX design. And you can only do that with innovation, I suppose, and creativity, to start making a bigger impact on user behaviour, or maybe more long-term impact on user behaviour. So I guess there's this interplay, a bit of a critical overlap is that you learn from experimentation to progress the UX, and that you need to use innovative ideas to progress your experimentation. So I guess that's how they live together and overlap, and that's the kind of point at which I really enjoy these two things together.
Having had that overlap and having that, what I would describe as a maturity of CRO, where they start to look at things other than the low-hanging fruit, do companies that you deal with still, when they're beyond that point, still look at a return on the investment? And is that return on investment in a monetary value or in different values?
Oh, yeah, I think if you're going to invest in any activity in a company, you've got to have rationale for that, and that means you need to understand that you're getting some sort of return. And ultimately, that return is likely to be monetary, because I think this activity should be focused on business value. I think the key thing in this is that the businesses that are going a bit further and are maturing in experimentation or CRO or whatever you want to call it, is that they're thinking more long term generally, and they're thinking about their program of experimentation in a long term way. And quite often you'll see people come to this discipline, they want the win, they want, the good result to maybe sell in the activity to the rest of the business. It's a slightly more short-term thinking. There's a fear of not sticking with it if stakeholders don't see results quickly. But the fact is that not every execution of a hypothesis is going to work, and not every hypothesis that you've thought of will fix the problems that you've identified, because if you knew for definite that something is going to work, then you wouldn't bother testing it. You'd just ship it. You'd just put it out on the website. So I think anyone doing CRO, one of the first things they'll learn is that it's a process of test and learn. But by doing your homework and identifying issues correctly, even if what you hypothesize doesn't work, even if what you design doesn't quite execute properly or in quite the right way, you've still identified the correct issue. You've still identified the user problem, the conversion issue, and you've got more and more evidence gathering as you go through experimentation to keep going back to that issue or problem statement and to go at it again with a new approach. And that's one of the benefits of experimentation. A lot of in experimentation, a 40% win rate is seen as good. So the other 60% of tests in a CRO program that's doing well, experiments where you're testing and you're learning and gathering more evidence. So I think companies that are maturing in this area are obviously putting value on learnings as well as getting monetary value out of their program, but ultimately they're focused on creating business value in the long term. And I think that's maybe the difference between those that are at the early stage of experimentation versus those that have been doing it for a while.
So do your clients think that 40% is a good return, a 40% success rate is a good return, because most people, if you said, well, actually, I'm getting 40% positive, most people think, well, actually, that means you're getting 60% negative.
I guess that's the change in thinking that people will go through. I mean, quite often, some of those tests out of that 60% that you're kind of putting in the negative pile go on to be iterations, or you learn from something that you executed incorrectly in that test, or the point that didn't perform well, and you fix that, and then the second iteration of that idea as such is then successful and seen as a winner. So a talk I heard last year, somebody phrased it really well in terms of you've got tests to earn, things that you know are likely to earn, and tests to learn, and that can be a really good categorisation to use in your program and to manage your stakeholders thinking as well. It's not every test out there is going to be creating monetary return, but if you don't do the tests to learn, you don't get the ideas that are going to be the ones that earn you a monetary return. So I think as well, like there's some stuff I've seen recently, really like Spiro's. They're an agency come out of Conversion Excel, really popular website for learning all about conversion optimization. They talk about program metrics, so more and more so when we're measuring a program of experimentation, we're not just focusing on the monetary return. Of course, a program's got to report on return on investment and lifetime value, but what about the other important program metrics? How many of your experiments did you learn from or turned into that concluded with a result that helped you move on to something else that was really exciting? How many of those tests saved you a cost? So you could put something live and it could be really risky without testing it, and you could lose a lot of money. So there's a lot of experiments that would help you avoid the risk mitigation and help you avoid a cataclysmic error.
Mm-hmm.
And how much is your digital team or your wider organisation learning from the stuff that you're putting under the microscope because you're experimenting with it? So how many learnings are disseminating around the organisation? So starting to measure a programme of experimentation in more than just monetary terms is really important to seeing the value of experimentation, because it's not just testing. Just calling it testing is really underplaying what you get from it. It's like the massive insight generation, and your organisation are going to learn a process of how to think about other decision making in their business and putting everything to test and learn. So just thinking about it in a sort of siloed fashion in terms of monetary value is probably pretty dangerous, but you have to create, in my mind, you've got to get a return on investment, but you've got to think about this broader aspect of experimentation too.
One of the things that I think that we in the industry are challenged with is there are so many terms that are utilised for what you do and what we do. It's CRO, it's A/B testing, multivariate testing, it's customer satisfaction, it's customer experience, it's insight. And yet everybody seems to have their own kind of view of what that might be. If you look at, say, Google Analytics, people kind of know what Google Analytics is because it's using one term all the time. And I don't use that as a good example, I just use it as an example. Do you not think that there should be some conformity with regard to how we talk about this service that people like you and I offer?
Yes, and I think CRO is, widely known as a poorly formed name, I think, for the activity. It's, obviously a lot of activity is focused on conversion rate and conversion rate optimization, but it could be a micro conversion on a site, it could be a macro conversion. You could test to improve average order value, but we don't suddenly sort of start using the acronym AOVO or something like that.
But one of the things, sorry to interrupt, but one of the things is there are so many terms, it's trying to be able to gather everybody in the industry together and say, we should be talking about this, and the aspects of this, include that, include the other. Because I think, when you talk to somebody in the early stages of CRO, they're all about conversion to win. Mm-hmm. And if you look at further on in the maturity, people start to talk about learning from their examples and getting better customer journeys and better customer insight, etc., etc. But it's all part of the same thing. It just seems a little confusing to those people who know nothing about it. So when I sit at a dinner party or whatever, I know that's an old-fashioned term these days, but when I sit around with friends and they say, well, what is it that you do or your company does? And I try to explain it, they go, well, what does that what kind of industry is that? And you kind of think, well, I don't have a label to put it on that covers everything, because it's just touching every point. So if I was to give you a kind of a direct question, what would you call it to encompass all of that? What would it be?
I think it's experimentation, I think. But I think then the word experimentation comes with so much connotation from science, but good experimentation of a digital product is also embedded in scientific principle and good statistical analysis. So I think experimentation describes it well, but whether it describes it well to everyone, I'm not sure. I think as you mature into it, you realise that it is this kind of test and learn process, and you get so much learning, you learn so much from it, that I think that term really works for it. But CRO, I still use the word CRO. My job title involves the word CRO, and CRO will always stick. So I think despite its meaning being a bit off the mark, it will stay around. It's just easy, I think. And there's just some sort of inherent knowledge that comes along with it, that that involves experimentation and the optimization of sites. I just think they're just really long words, aren't they?
They are.
The acronym just sticks. Will the industry ever settle on something? I think that's where the industry is heading. Everybody talks about experimentation more and more. So
let's stick with that, shall we?
Yeah, why not?
So looking back at your career, you've probably spent 50% of your time client side and 50% agency side. Mm-hmm. Now, in a world of experimentation, while the fundamentals are the same, dealing with the end user, whether that's your boss or whether that's a different company, are there any challenges in each individual side?
Yes. There's some pros and cons to each. I've had the privilege to work across many industry sectors, working agency side and learning about user motivations in more than just say travel e-commerce, where I worked before, and then working client side, I think specifically to user experience and experimentation, I think you just have more freedom to go along a few different tangents, and I think you can be therefore there's maybe more grounds for innovation because of that. So an agency will be brought in on either fixed rate project, fixed price projects, and you have to do a lot of kind of abstract thinking up front about what time you're going to need, and therefore how you're going to spend that time and spend the budget that's available for that project. So you can end up a little bit constrained and time boxed, which isn't always a bad thing, to produce the goods that you and the outcomes and the results that you need to. You might also be in a retained sort of process, but there's a certain amount of velocity or activity you need to be getting through. So this kind of like area of innovation I was talking about, maybe innovating around UX or innovating around consumer psychology, might be a bit harder to go down those tangents. So if you work in a good agency environment, you'll be given a bit of room to be able to produce that innovative thinking for your clients, because clients do want to see that from an agency. But I think as with most digital marketing disciplines, you'll see this go more and more in-house, and I think that'll be due to economic pressures to some degree, but also due to companies wanting to take ownership. And I think it's because they'll be feeling like they're taking ownership of the ideas, the innovations and the change that impacts their sites. And they also want to embed those learnings in more areas of their business. So it's not just a sort of siloed activity in a centralised part of the business. You'll see experimentation go into all product development teams, for example. So I think the difference with client side is you can maybe dig a bit deeper down a bit of a rabbit hole sometimes and have the freedom to do so. And I think that's good for ideas.
One of the challenges, I would think, is the whole aspect of politics inside a business. If you're sitting inside the business, you probably know the politics, but are then constrained by the politics. When you're outside in an agency, you might not know what the politics are, and that's the downside. But you have the freedom to be able to say, you're paying me to do this job, and therefore I'm seen as some sort of expert in being able to tell you what to do. Do you think that's right, or do you think I'm confusing things a little?
I think that's very true. You are, in the middle of it all when you're working client side, and you're, at the coal face, I suppose, of any politics that might exist. And we can be slightly more objective agency side, and we might know of those things going on, but we can, we're away from it. We want to embed ourselves in a client's business, to immerse ourselves in everything to do with the products, the audience, conversion, the data, to be able to act and produce good outcomes. However, that separation from politics and also the day-to-day, the business as usual, means we can really just get on with the specialism that we've been asked to do. So the other side of that, though, is that sometimes without being well immersed, we the worst thing we could do as an agency is go back to a client with what they already know. So
yes.
You can often be looked at as, how do you can't possibly know my business, you've not worked here for 20 years. I have, and I absolutely understand that point of view, as well as that you don't want an agency just sort of seagull swooping in and pretending they know everything about it. So I mean, one thing, if you're working in a organisation and you are working with agencies, do immerse them as much as possible, not in your politics but in your business and your audience and your products, so that you get the most from your agency. So I think you're right in saying there are politics, and we do have a more objective point of view working outside of that.
You mentioned a few moments about the economics of things and how they might be changing. Do you think the current situation where we've post-COVID, we've got an economic crisis with inflationary pressures, mean that companies need to change the way they implement experimentation, or, as you intimated a little while ago, they feel that they need to be able to look at cost cutting?
Questions are getting harder, John. But I think definitely you'll see more and more go in-house, and whilst that might have pre-COVID or before some of the kind of current economic stresses, that might have just been seen as a more natural progression in maturity, and now I think that will also be driven by economic change and the need to produce cost cutting. But at the same time, it's not an easy discipline to implement. So you could start just with a specialist in-house, but to really build a program up and build the scope across maybe all your websites, or all aspects of your website, from maybe you want to go from acquisition into retention and experimenting across more of the customer journey. You're going to need more people, and not just a CRO specialist. You might want to work with analysts or data scientists or user researchers. You're going to need designers. You're going to need developers, and grow that team out. That also needs investment too. So sometimes it can just be simpler to employ that external agency. So I think you'll see it going in-house as disciplines really proved its return and proved its abilities to do something really positive for business. And that's when when organisations will start making those decisions to go, okay, we're doing this now, we're going to embed it in every product team. And that's going to take investment, but it's really important to us. And it takes some senior leadership that really buy into it for that to happen. And I think it is more important than ever for another reason in this economic environment. I mean, it's a way of managing risk by learning about a change before you commit to it. So perhaps, potentially, senior leaders in organisations and businesses will start to see that they can't afford not to be doing experimentation, and they can't afford not to be embedding it more and more in the aspects of their operations. So that could also be a determining factor as we go. Let's hope it's not too much of an economic shift, but as we go through economic shifts.
Yeah. The one thing that's happened over the last, I don't know, probably pre-COVID, there seems to be a lot more direct consumer kind of businesses out there, which are kind of ruffle the feathers of the traditional retail sector. Because there's kind of, well, you can buy this from me or you can buy it from any one of our partners. Do you think that's had any effect on the way that businesses, particularly retail businesses, look at being able to implement experimentation? Are they affected by these changes?
Yeah, and if they don't see that they are affected by them, then I think that there's a whole growth area in D2C that they're blind to. And I think it's really interesting. In terms of consumer behaviour, there's a definite shift towards D2C. The pandemic's accelerated that. I don't think it was the pandemic alone, though. Mm-hmm. I think there's some great D2C brands out there that have grown before the pandemic as well. And I think it's sort of one bit of success will feed another bit of success. People will see the success of massive brands like Nike being really successful in D2C. It'll inspire more people to do so. So it kind of feeds, the success will feed other successes. But I think what a direct brand can offer its customers is probably the most interesting, and it's good for consumers. Great content, deep knowledge about a product, subscriptions, ease of use because of that. So retailers have got a really hard job at competing, and therefore should be including competitor analysis or competitor review in their test ideation to understand what they should be experimenting with. So, it might not just be enough anymore to look at your own data and look at users. And maybe this is where UX innovation comes in as well, where you really need to be look at the market for what is setting the bar, what is becoming a basic expectation that perhaps used to be a delighter, is now maybe a necessary aspect for you to put on your website, and therefore put it on in a safe way by experimenting with it first and seeing what good that brings. But what they have got on their side is authority. Traditional retailers have got authority and brand presence and trust, and you can buy more than one product there. But it is a massive challenge. How do you become good at, as good as a manufacturer, as good as the D2C brand at knowing about that product? So, but it is a big change in getting people will stick to what they know as well. The one thing you didn't mention there is marketplaces. So the traditional retailer isn't just threatened, I suppose, by D2C. The marketplace arena is growing. It's Amazon are obviously the leaders in that landscape, but there's obviously other marketplace websites that are popping up all over the place, and also driving margins down because they work around ease of fulfillment. So the whole retail market is totally being turned on its head, and if we are in economic shift times, like recessionary or depressionary years, we will see some of them go if they don't compete.
So it's not just retailers that are obviously having issues, problems trying to downsize, etc. It's also the financial institutions that are doing that, with the number of branches closing astronomically. I know I now have to travel 5 miles, pay £4 for parking to be able to go and visit my bank, which seems ludicrous as it was just down the road beforehand. But one of the things is, if you look at, back in March, we saw the failing of 2 financial institutions, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, and also the takeover of Credit Suisse. The reason that these were failed was their lack of ability to give investors their money back. Do you feel that financial institutions need to up their game to instill greater trust in their customers? And if so, how do they go about it?
That's a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question. You did say they were getting more difficult towards the end.
There is indeed a lot of trust lost, and I'm sure the world would be a much better place if such institutions showed greater responsibility to ensure customers didn't get to the point of losing confidence in the first place. But, I'm sure there's a lot of crashes that have been all about consumer confidence, runs on banks, etc. So, yeah, the trust is playing a massive factor in these big kind of crashes or, financial institutions going out of business, etc. But should they up their game to instill greater trust? I feel a bit like I can't talk on behalf of the institutions you call out, but I can talk a little about financial services in general. Yeah. I've worked with quite a few financial services companies in the past, and it's a really interesting arena for consumer psychology. And insurance is an industry where you will find, when you talk to users, a low level of trust. People don't like purchasing insurance. It's a grudge purchase. People, yeah.
That's a great phrase. A grudge purchase.
People are worried they're not going to get paid when they claim. Users don't understand the jargon they look at on a website, so they feel like someone's trying to pull a fast one on them. And what you get at the end of all this, you put a lot of effort into purchasing insurance. You don't even get the bit of paper anymore, do you? You get a PDF or a confirmation email. Yes. So you spend quite a lot of money. You exchange quite a lot of your well-earned money for something that is just basically a kind of risk mitigation factor. So that whole industry, and I assume banking as well to some degree, is selling on on consumer motivation and consumer trust in a brand. Is quite like price will factor in, and obviously the success of price comparison sites. But I found when I've talked to users is people will go with bigger brands just because they trust them more to pay out and to satisfy their claims, etc. As long as the price is affordable. So it's a great example, this industry, where consumer psychology or even disruption is needed to play a part in your experimentation process to improve engagement and conversion. When I talked earlier about how I love the interplay of UX and CRO, because if you design with a feedback loop of data or user feedback, then you're going to reach better levels of user satisfaction. But I talked about how with CRO you're going to reach a peak unless you innovate with UX. Well, in an industry like insurance or financial services, you need to innovate with psychology as well. It's a sort of industry where changing a button colour isn't going to make people change their mind or feel more reassured. It's totally an abstract world of motivation in terms of user consideration and selection of products. It can be really emotive when it comes to like pet insurance. You see the sites that do really well in that field play a lot on user emotion. So inspiring trust to inspire that user motivation is massively important in this industry to convert. I don't know how, with the financial institutions you mentioned, that they've gone down because they did something wrong with people's money. So that's probably a bit beyond what I can comment on.
Just mentioning that fact that banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, things like that, use emotive language to be able to help promote their products. I think that has a negative effect as well as showing empathy, and I think it's a really difficult balance to be able to get that empathetic approach without actually thinking these guys are telling me the worst things and so therefore I feel this fear that I need to buy it.
Yeah, I guess this is where different aspects of consumer psychology come in. Unless you're a trusted brand and you can, like, people really know you for quality products and trust, you can't really just sort of sit there and go, you can trust us. I think that automatically will make you go, well, I don't. I don't trust what they say. So this is where other psychological principles have to come in. Consensus is used quite a lot to, not just in insurance or financial services, but across e-commerce as well. People will seek a user-generated review of a product or service or a brand to validate their choice. And companies know this now, so we'll show branded reviews on their site to try and prove that somebody else, it's not what we say, trust what other people say about our product. So obviously that's a massive use of consumer psychology to inspire trust. In the same way, endorsements or accreditation would provide authority as well. So in using emotive language, you can't just rely on your strapline alone and a nice picture. You've got to look around at what the community say about your product, and therefore being reputable and starting to be more honest, that'll come back in your user reviews, becomes really important.
You mentioned about the fact that a lot of people look to user reviews, but I have this theory that people are now looking for negative reviews as opposed to positive reviews. And is that a kind of a psychological effect that people are saying, these are all too good to be true?
Yes, I think it's kind of it's about your own behaviour, right? You're probably more likely to say something okay or good about a company unless you've had something terrible happen. So I think I'm definitely one of those people that will look at the worst ones, because there's so many, right? There's a critical mass of these reviews, and you've got to get to the ones that you think are really important to you. So you want to know why people thought it was bad, and then you're going to balance out, like, maybe if you look objectively at it, you look at the percentage of those reviews, and you might have a boundary. In fact, I've spoken to users in user testing that will say if it goes above a certain percentage of bad reviews, then it might be a no. So people put these little tricks in place to speed up their kind of purchase process, but they'll still want to have a look into it. So I think by nature we tend to give the benefit of the doubt, and because we know that as users, we'll go and look at what other people have said that's beyond that benefit of doubt as such.
It's always looking for the catch, isn't it? I think that people are when they're faced with so much kind of positivity from websites, and I think most websites by their very nature are very positive, they're looking about what's wrong.
Yeah, and it is a challenge. I'm talking to users as well, that they don't trust what a brand puts in their own published reviews. They will go off site and have a look at Trustpilot or FIFO themselves, or whatever reviews platform that you use, and that's a challenge, right? Because you've lost them to another site momentarily. Are they going to come back? Are they going to still be in purchase mode? Are they going to get lost in this sea of reviews, and it just becomes a time? Oh, we've got to go now, I'll have to come back to this later type task. So it is a challenge being believed, but that's where you almost have to change behaviour as a company to become more reputable, and it becomes a nice kind of cycle of it pays off long term because you're becoming a more trustworthy company in the process.
I think that's a whole different conversation about trying to change the views.
Yeah.
But Dinah, it's been a fascinating conversation thus far, and I appreciate the time you've given up to me to make this recording. It's one of those things that I'm sure it evolves over time. So over the next 6 months, who knows what the financial crisis is going to affect the market. But I think for now, it's been a great conversation, and perhaps we'll pick this up again at some time in the future.
Yes, I'd love to, John. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.